I've been fasting most weeks since 2017 and consider myself an expert in how not to break a fast. These years of breaking a fast have taken me through seasons where I have had a disaster of GI troubles, diarrhea, not feeling well, all to find my way to this list of what it is that I recommend patients do and not do. I've learned over the years that one of my favorite ways to break a fast is to have sauerkraut with Polish sausage, but that does not work for most people. That Polish sausage would have led me to diarrhea the first seasons of my fasting. On the Dr. Boz channel, we use the 36-hour rule before we start to use the word fasting. That means if you hold off eating for 12 hours or 24 hours, good job, but we don't call that fasting. And I tend to see that the troubles we're about to talk about are definitely more of an issue when you get to that 36 hours and longer time without food. If you take a closer look deep inside your bowels, that small and large intestine have very specialized cells, and when you deny food for over 36 hours, there's a couple of cells that do things in a very predictable way. For starters, the mucus cells continue to produce mucus. So that slime layer that naturally coats our bowels gets thicker and thicker throughout the time that you're fasting. The second thing that happens is those digestive enzymes found in special cells called Paneth cells, well, they store up. So the longer you go without eating, the juicier they get. When you add food, especially if you add a large volume of food after not having stimulated them in a couple of days, you get a tidal wave of these digestive enzymes along with an enhanced mucus layer that definitely leads you to the toilet. In my initial phases of fasting, although I understood this, I thought the rules were not going to apply to me. So when I would break a fast, especially where it had been a longer fast and I was a little gluttonous when eating my first meal, I paid the price every time in the bathroom with diarrhea. Now, that diarrhea is not dangerous. It's really just annoying, and it can dehydrate you a little more than you should be dehydrated after you've just denied yourself food for a few days. So the best answer is to find options and the little tips and tricks that don't land you dumping your results into the toilet. Number one, do not overeat. The gluttonous reaction for restoring all that food you denied over those hours of fasting is definitely not what you should be doing on that meal. Those celebration meals tend to inflame your gut and cause a much greater insulin response than we are looking to dial down in the patients we take care of. When I get a history of a patient who does a celebration meal, I like to point out that they probably fasted too long. I would back down on the number of hours you fasted until you're not celebrating with food at the end of it. This is a good balance that you're developing the skills of fasting, of denying food, while your gut health is improving and your coping skills of overeating are not sabotaging things. I give specific emphasis to not reward with carbohydrates or alcohol when breaking your fast. These two tend to cause the most gastric secretions, which almost always result in that diarrhea. So what is my protocol? Well, number one, you should be hydrating throughout your fast. And as you approach those final hours of fasting, I tell folks to increase the amount of water they're taking in. This really does prime those Paneth cells to not over secrete if they are hydrated right before you're going to stimulate them with food. The second thing we talk about is we want that volume of food to be very small for the first couple of sessions. So you can use things like carnivore crisps or some sardines, which are low in volume of food, and that alone can be the only antidote people needed to not have the consequences of diarrhea. I really encourage folks to use fermented foods for these small micro meals as they are breaking their fast. Those fermented foods could be sauerkraut or kimchi or even kombucha, as long as that sugar content isn't excessive. I often have folks try and substitute some pickles or other highly acidic foods in the stay of fermented foods. Those pickled foods are not fermented foods. So although it can work for some people with just slight problems, if you're really struggling with diarrhea, get over to the actual fermented foods as your first meal after that fast. So after several months of struggling with diarrhea, despite using these tips and tricks, I dove in deeper to the literature. And one of the best antidotes in a bowel that overstimulates when you end a fast is to make sure you add a hearty dose of polyphenols. After reading that research about polyphenols, I tried adding the cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, and that was a disaster. My diarrhea was the worst ever. It was a little more research to find that if you cold-pressed algae into these little tablets, it was a super high dose of polyphenols, a low carbohydrate, and a low volume of food. And like magic, my diarrhea stopped. One dose, which is actually 30 tablets of these cold-pressed algae, and I was in the freedom of breaking a fast without that relationship with the toilet that I was definitely ready for a divorce. I mean, there's only so many times you can say poop and diarrhea on a video. After about 4 to 6 weeks of taking these, I ran out and I continued to fast every week. And to my surprise, the diarrhea did not come back. Eventually, it started to haunt me just a little as I restored my supply of those energy bits. I found that even a half dose at the end of my fast was enough to keep the diarrhea from happening. Those polyphenols really are the key as they lace through that mucus layer and then really absorb that first tidal wave of those digestive enzymes, preventing the flushing found naturally after you haven't eaten in over 48 hours. The downside to energy bits is they are rather expensive and they do taste odd, so you want to swallow them, not chew them, or you'll have green teeth and you'll need to pick that stuff off of your teeth. If the price tag for those energy bits is too high, you can get pretty good results with fermented food about every half an hour for the 2 hours before you break your fast. There's lots of recommendations out there to have leafy vegetables and tomatoes to break your fast or avoid fats. Personally, I found these little tablets did a great job of adding the polyphenols and then allowing my gut to handle some of my favorite foods like Polish sausage and sauerkraut. Although I hate the term leaky gut, I did make a video teaching you why and how does that happen. I'll see you there.